Hello and welcome to the Tight Five Live. Ben Kimber here, sitting up in Sydney with my Sydney compatriot at the moment, Morgan Turanui. Morgs, how are you, big man?
Evening, Benny. Pretty good, actually. Beautiful winter's day here in sunny Sydney. My poor family's stuck in Melbourne. They're getting photos of sunny skies just to add to the niggles that they're experiencing down there, unfortunately. Although we've got a guest tonight who I think has even had better weather than we have. So
yeah, wouldn't surprise me. Made a couple of big guests tonight, actually. We've got Reds No8 Harry Wilson, and then we've got Simon Raiwalui, former assistant coach for the Wallabies and now the GM of rugby in Fiji. Plenty going on there in the Pacific as well, so it'll be good to get to him. Mate, just before we do, I wanted to say that to all the guys out there who are listening on our podcast or via our website on therugbyruckus.com, you can see the URL up there at the top. This is a live show at 8 o'clock Sunday night, Sydney. It goes out on the Rugby Pass, YouTube and Facebook channels. But we also put the audio up on our podcast channel for our regular podcast listeners. And we've been going for over a year now, Morg. So plenty of guys tuning in there. One thing I also want to mention at the top of the show, Morgs, is we're going to start doing a weekly email. So for subscribers, some of our listeners have been saying, how can they support us? We've been doing a bit more live streaming, getting guests on. So we thought we'd do something with a bit more value. We're going to do a weekly email starting next week, and I'll send something up on the website about that shortly. So if you're keen to support us, but also if you want a bit of an inside word each week, and Morgs, I've even said I'm going to get you giving us your Wallaby 15 live. You've always tried to avoid it. Each week I'm going to get you to give the live Wallaby 15, mate. You're in?
Yeah, well, we're going to need some terms and conditions with you. I'm in.
All right. Look, let me just show what we're going to go through the show today. As we know, it's the Tight Five Live. 5 quick things to talk about. Harry Wilson's coming on in about 1 minute. We're going to go to the player of the round. We go through each of the 2 Australian games. We talk about who played well. We pull one player out who we think stood up. Coach's Corner, Morgs will run through a play, maybe 2 plays today that he said are really worth looking at in the footy. Then we're going to get Simon Raiwalui on. He's down there as number 5, but we're actually going to bring him in early on number 4 as well. Of course, his experience with the Wallabies. We're going to ask him to have a look at the second rowers around Australia with us, particularly with the news this week that Rob Simmons is leaving our shores and heading to London Irish. Plenty of time for these young blokes to stand up. So we'll talk second rowers. And then we want to talk about the Pacific and Fiji with Simon. So that's the plan for today. But without further ado, Morgs, let's bring in our first guest. And that's this guy. He might be feeling a little tender today, if not in the body, perhaps in the head and heart after a tough loss in a great game of footy. Harry Wilson, how are you, bud?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, no, a little bit sore and a bit upset after last night, but no, all good.
Mate, how'd the rest of the team pull up? Everyone feeling all right?
Yeah, no, everyone was pretty good after the game. Obviously, Chrissy has a little calf injury, but otherwise, yeah, everyone else is all good.
Mate, how tough was that finish? You guys, you put on your best performance, of the year. I think the Reds, very physical, spread the ball, scored a couple of great tries, including one which was disallowed. We'll look at it a little bit later. But mates, how tough a loss was that after such an epic game?
Yeah, it was a pretty tough one to take, I guess, because we feel as if we've built pretty well over the last 3 to 4 weeks to play some really good footy last night. But obviously we thought we nearly had it at the end there, but obviously it was very good by the Brumbies sticking right to the end and then getting that kick at the end to win.
Mate, I noticed after the game, particularly your captain said, and I think the quote was something along the lines of, we knew they couldn't go through us. So he was talking about that they need to go to the maul, and it sounded like you guys have enormous faith in your defensive line. What's the mindset you're taking when you play the Brumbies and other teams about that integrity you're trying to keep in your defensive line?
Yeah, well, I guess our new defence coach, Michael Todd's we've been focusing really hard on our defence, and I guess we felt in the Super Rugby AU that our defence has probably been our strongest point. So I guess in any footy team you want to match them up front, and that's what we thought we did in defence. And obviously they did us in the mauls, but I guess we're pretty proud of our defensive performance because I guess they didn't get through us. They had to, I guess, more through us. But yeah,
mate, the game was within reach. Did it play out the way you thought? You knew what the Brumbies' strengths were and what you wanted to do in the game. Did you play it the way you wanted to?
Yeah, no, we did. We obviously wanted to have the ball in play for a large amount of time because I guess they've got a pretty strong line out and maul. So I guess giving away so many penalties, I guess, helped them with a lot of line outs and mauls. But otherwise, just general phases exactly what we expected, and I guess it was just a good battle because both teams wanted to play some running rugby, so it was a good game to be part of.
Speaking of running rugby, Morgs, what do you think Harry's game is bringing? You've talked about it a bit on this show. What are you seeing from Harry that you're liking?
Yeah, I just like the fact that he's looking to be on the ball and involved as much as possible in both attack and defence. I like that enthusiasm from a young player. It's not just sometimes about just sort of sticking in your corridor and your channel, doing your job with senior players around him. I think he's become a leader straight away, not with words but with his actions. I really liked his self-awareness in a recent article after being identified in a pony squad and being identified by someone like a Dave Rennie as a player of that interest. He realises that he's got parts of his game to work, and I think you named defence and set piece. So the great thing is that you're aware of some of your core roles that are required, but you're playing good footy. I think Swaney's put up that you're from the filth, but you've sort of trodden the great pathway. Gregory Terrace played in our Australian underage teams, played some Hospitals Cup stuff at Brothers, so you've had that great breeding ground come through, and you look ready to play at that level, which is not an easy thing to do. For a long time in Australia, we've gone, we need third tier, we need a bridge, but you're a good example of a guy that can come through rep stuff, can play, grade level in Brisbane, and show that step up to Super Rugby is attainable. So it's been good to see.
Harry, mate, a little bit of a change in the back row for you this week. Does your game have to change much playing the 8 role when you've got, say, those 2 open sides, or the guys who play more open sides versus Scott Young on the side?
I guess a little bit. I guess when we've got Fraser and Rongers, I guess definitely the breakdown. I don't worry about that too much in defence because I know we've got 2 genuine on-ballers. But I guess our game plan changes a bit because obviously those 2 just roam around the field. But when we got, Angus Scott Young, our main prioritise there is just trying to have a good defensive line and just, work more as a 15 and not probably worry about pilfering as much. So I guess my game probably doesn't change too much, but I guess as a team we slightly changed into, different formation, whether we're going to be trying to fetch the ball more or just try and have a good line and just beat them through defence.
Now, mate, for those rugby fans who haven't, seen you play when you're a schoolboy and all the way through, are we seeing the kind of game you've always had? Have you always been an 8, for instance? And I don't know if you saw this, but we had the Fox Sports guys, the stats guys, tweet us a couple of weeks ago, and they said that you'd set a record for carries or runs in a game for a back rower in Super Rugby. And so, mate, have you always been a guy who goes looking for those carries and those lines?
Yeah, I guess my way through school and club, I've always, loved running. It's probably been, the most natural bit to my game. Running, my defence and, set pieces, what I've kind of had to work on from that. So, I've always loved running the ball, and then that's probably, which has come most natural to me.
And to be effective, is it making those combos with the blokes like JOC and others? Is it working out how you can make sure you're effectively running off your teammates? Yeah,
exactly. I guess probably on the weekend after, because we kind of lost, combinations after that long COVID layoff. But I feel now, we've built some good combinations, and it's pretty good having some outside backs who are so threatening like Flippo, Geordie and Chrissy, because if you kind of be around them, something will come soon. So the more you get to know your teammates, the more chances there is for you.
Mm-hmm. Mate, what about Thorny? How happy was he with the game despite the loss last night? Did he get up you at half time or full time? How did he handle the match?
It was pretty happy how we played, because we played how we wanted to play, and we thought we were probably the better team, but just one specific area, Moors, is where we really let ourselves down. So we left it, leading the game, knowing that when we verse them again, that we know we can beat them. So he was pretty positive about it, but obviously everyone was pretty hurting in the shed. So I'm sure during the week he'll speak to us about, that winning edge, and just we got to close those tight games and get those wins when when it's pretty tight.
Mate, from the outside, as a media guy who watches Thorny, he doesn't say a lot. Is he just threatening, like quietly threatening when he's trying to get you revved up, or does he get into you verbally?
I'll get into you verbally when he gets rolled up. I think he thinks he's playing footy, so it's kind of good. He gets pretty G'd up and he gets us going, and a spray from him too. It's kind of, a few of us young blokes, we need him a fair bit too to pull us into line, and I know they benefit me a little bit, and he's obviously a man of few words, so when he speaks you listen, and if he's angry at you, you've definitely done something wrong, so you just fix that up and get back into it.
Mate, you've got some different characters in that side. How do the different guys react to him? Taniela Tupou always seems to make the Instagram highlights reels carrying on a bit. How does a bloke like that interact with what seems to be a very authoritarian kind of Brad Thorne?
I guess Thorny probably just turns away when Nella's doing all his stupid stuff. But yeah, I guess he's really good. I guess he realizes everyone in the rugby team is going to be different, so I guess treats everyone to how they are as a person. So no, he's very good that way, Thorny.
Now, mate, how have you found having just a domestic competition? Now, the big discussion lately has been around what happens next for Australian rugby, Trans-Tasman, etc. Have you enjoyed, the derbies? And are you a guy who's in the camp of, say, a Trans-Tasman competition? Would you like to see that?
Yeah, well, I guess I've really enjoyed, the derbies here because I guess I'm just super happy back playing footy with obviously all, which is what happened. But I guess I'm probably a big supporter of versing New Zealand teams in the Trans-Tasman comp because I guess they're supposed to be the best in the world. So I guess as a Reds, we want to test ourselves against the best teams and best players. So I'd definitely love to be able to verse them next year. Obviously, there's a lot to happen before I guess we get there, but I guess it'd be pretty unreal to be able to verse them all next year.
Morgs, also Harry's, got to be one of those names that's on the list as we start to talk about the Wallabies squad in future. How strongly do you think he's in that mix, mate?
Yeah, very strongly, just on the back of performance. Obviously, I actually liked Dan McKellar's article. He was referencing mostly locks, but talking about, we love a shiny new toy in terms of rugby talent. And I like the fact that he tries to temper that enthusiasm with, dare I say it, Benny, getting players to have that body of work first before they make the Wallabies. But this is really an anomaly year. This is a high turnover year after a World Cup, as it always is. But even more so than normal, and even things like the Beale situation, Rob Simmons, those guys who may have stayed for a year or two extra between World Cups before moving on, they're going as well with the different budgetary constraints. So this is a very, very individual year in terms of Wallaby selection. And, as a byproduct of these derbies, if you're going toe-to-toe against your opposite numbers week in, week out for those jerseys, Harry's up against a returning Isi Naisarane. Valentini's a good player. He can play 6 or 8. Summer's a good player, can play 6 or 8. So these guys got to go toe-to-toe with each other. It's really hard when you're a Wallaby coach. Do you pick a guy because he played better than the opposite guy when they play each other, or are you looking for the guy who competes well against New Zealand teams or who competes well against South African teams? This year, it's pretty much who goes well in derbies. If the Reds can be up the pointy end of this Super Rugby AU, maybe go toe-to-toe with the Brumbies in a Super Rugby AU final, then a lot of these guys, including Harry, will be in that conversation.
Harry, I think you were born the year we won the last World Cup. Is that right? 99.
Yep.
Is there anyone in particular that you've looked at as a young bloke and sort of tried to model your game on, or are there any mentors that Queensland put you in touch with coming into Super Rugby and looking to progress to Test level?
I guess probably last year, my first year in the squad, I guess there was a few older boys in the team. I guess like Scott Higginbotham, even Caleb Timu, just people in my position who'd played Test footy. So I guess that was probably my main thing last year, was just to learn from them as much as I could, knowing they were leaving, that there was a spot available for the next year. So I guess I was pretty big on just trying to learn as much from them, and just while they were there, learn as much as I could. So hopefully for this year to be able to play for the Reds. So, but yeah, that was probably my main thing, I guess, mentoring-wise with Red so far.
Well, mate, you seem to have adapted to Super Rugby very well. How much of a step up do you think Test Rugby would be? You think you'd be physically ready for it?
I'd hope so. I guess I've never played before, so you wouldn't know unless you play it. But I guess I just got to focus on playing well for the rest of this season and then put myself in the frame at the end of the year.
Well, mate, you certainly are putting yourself in the frame. It's been a pleasure to watch you play this year. Mate, the amount of ball carries and the amount of impact you're having on games has been fantastic. Morgs, any final thoughts before we let Harry take off?
No, I think maybe the key to making that Wallaby squad is that red headgear. I reckon he keeps wearing the red headgear. It makes you stick out when you do good things. I think it's like the George Smith dreadlocks, or I think Steve Hoyles wore a white headgear for a season to make the Wallabies. I think sometimes it just makes you stand out, so that when you do a good thing, they don't miss it. It probably works the other way too, though.
Yeah, make sure I keep wearing it then.
Good, mate, I thought it might make you less easy to spot in the street, mate. People might not recognise you much without your headgear on.
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone would realise no way about my headgear.
Well, mate, look, we're halfway through the Super Rugby season. It's been a pleasure to watch you play, as I said, mate. We wish you all the best, and thanks for joining us on the Ruckus Live.
Thank you very much for having me, guys. Cheers.
No worries, mate. We're going to look at some of your play now. Cheers, mate. Morgs, as I said, it has been absolutely wonderful to watch that bloke play and to see him come to life. You're dead right. That piece, I think, that we saw McKellar writing about, let's not go silly about the young blokes. Absolutely, let's not go silly. But also, when we see these blokes who get into super level at his age and start to really dominate, you got to watch them and think, well, they're a big chance, don't you?
Yeah, you do. And I think that patience has to increase the further down the team you go. 15 outside backs, they can come in really quickly, really early. And slowly, as you get towards the front row, you've got to be more and more patient. So back row's just sort of jammed in the middle there. You can be a little bit less patient than you would have to with locks and front rowers. Sometimes you can just believe what your eyes are seeing. He's obviously in a traffic jam of quality players. I mentioned a couple of them previously, but you can only judge on what he's doing at the moment. We want him to continue doing it. We want him to continue developing his game. I like the fact that in that back five in the scrum, whoever's there for the Reds, they've got a dash of Radthorn in them as well. Bit of aggression, do their role really well, do the tough things. But this guy's got a bit of extra as well. He's got a bit of X factor with the ball. I like the weights, and I think actually he's really benefited from playing with the two fetchers over the ball because he has been the go-to man. He's been the go-to man in the back row, and with Taniela, the two key ball-carrying players, the two creative players in the forward pack. So that's helped him get a lot of touches, and we saw those stats that you mentioned. So it'll be interesting now if he finds that balance in the back row with Scott Young. I would be tempted if I was Brad Thornton, just to try and find a hybrid six that can jump well, but still give them that on-ball pressure, which has been helping them. So that's a tough back row selection that Brad Thorne has at the moment.
Absolutely. Now, mate, let's just quickly move along. Before we get to our next segment, I just want to highlight, you've mentioned there the body of work, what a great body of work that Harry has put together. I just want to give our shop a plug, mate. We sell Rugby Ruckus T-shirts. Rugby Ruckus, the podcast they play in heaven. Our Bodies in Motion T-shirt. And you want me in that scrum, you need me in that scrum. That's our Scrum Soldier shirt there. You can get those at therugbyruckus.com and then head to our shop because I know I wear mine a fair bit. We've sold a few, actually. The Scrum Soldier T-shirt, I think, is probably our most popular one. Mate, moving right along, let's start talking about our players of the round. Now, we have we pick 3 players out in each game, and then we go straight into player of the round. We'll do that, and then I can see that we've actually got Simon Raiwalui in the green room, so we'll bring him in straight after that, mate. We might get him involved while you're going through your coach's corner, and he might pick, because I never get to pick apart your coaching, but I reckon Simon probably could.
Yeah,
so we'll bring him in a minute.
But it's just me, no one to disagree with me.
But let's quickly, firstly, just have a look at the game, mate. Force Rebels, a great contest, and great to see a super time game that finished with a try. There were chances for both teams to win it. The Rebels ended up having enough fortitude to get down there and get that extra point. Not to the standard of the game we saw on Saturday night, Morgs, but certainly I was impressed with the Force. We're talking about a team here in the Force who, they've been Frankenstein together, if you will, in the last couple of months, up against a Rebels side which has been together with some consistency and continuity for a couple of years. They took them right down to the wire, and they were one kick away from stealing this one. What did you make of this game, Morgs?
Yeah, they were. And those two guys that we see there with their photos at the top, they're the ones that really kept both of their teams in it. The game ebbed and flowed in terms of momentum a lot. The Force started really well, and then the Rebel dragged them right back and had a really strong second period of the game in terms of momentum, which is such an important thing. And Tamura and John Lance, they were very important for their teams. Matt Tamura, who I keep saying, I just have never thought he was a 10 because he does all the running and doing things at a 12, and he's such an excellent foil as that capable second ball
such a physical game too.
Exactly, yeah. But then you put that into the 10 jersey. You've got one of the best tacklers in the backs cohort of Australian rugby in that 10 channel. It's very, very effective, and then he's adding layers to his game with kicking and things like that. He has been absolutely crucial for that Rebels team, and John Lance has done the same. I think the Force, for obvious reasons, as you've already mentioned, Benny, they're the ones with the most improvement in this second half when everyone gets to play each other again. The more and more time they spend together, this is a really hard period for our players. Rebels and Force have been away from home for so long. It must be starting to get harder and harder for them being away from friends and family. Although I think, obviously a few guys would sneakily enjoy playing golf and doing some footy training along the way. It's got to be tough as much on the families left behind as the ones, as the players in there. But the Force being away will be really helpful with them improving at an exponentially fast rate, and they'll be the ones that will improve. The other guy who, funnily enough, I almost didn't want to put him in the players of the round is Isi Naisarani. Benny, you agreed he should go in there because he'll just improve again. He was good. What he does is he just adds that punch. The Rebels off the back of him rely so much on him. They relied a lot on Amanaki Murphy previously. Naisarani's filled that role for them. They're a different team with his go forward and being able to play off the back of that.
Now, mate, I just did want to show the Force try because I thought you'd like the way it was a set-piece try. Just a quick view here. But, Frisbee off the back, takes the extra man across and finds John O'Lance and straight into space and then just hands. What did you think of that one, Morgs?
Oh, it's excellent. And it's exactly how they would have trained it. What they would really want is Frisbee to get out really lateral and go hard at the inside shoulder of that first defender. And that's what creates that indecision in Meeks' mind where he has to pick one of two. And it's just, Billy makes you just sitting there, you pick 50-50, you either pick right or you pick wrong. And then that transfer pass from Jack McGregor, which really is the play that finishes it off, turns a line break into a first phase try. So just every single player in the force back line doing their role was excellent.
Nice. Mate, Brumbies 22, Reds 20. It was an absolute cracker of a game, I thought. Right down to the wire. Mac Hansen nails a 40-metre penalty to win it, for a bloke off the bench who's, I like the look of his feet, actually. Good, sharp feet there. But, mate, this was great footy, start to finish.
Yeah, it was. The guys we mentioned with Harry, we thought probably not just by being polite, but well-deserved. Obviously, Harry's in there with Rob Valentini. A couple of quality performances there. Obviously, Jordan, first game back, and geez, it looks seamless. He looked like a class above straight away when he should have been rusty. And this was a quality game of rugby, as you mentioned. And Harry mentioned the strength of the maul for the Brumbies, the way themselves into position to be able to strike with the ball, the other layers, which I think we'll look at in a moment, to their game that they're adding. Best Reds perform. This is, in terms of, it's a good form line. The Brumbies are, top of the log in Super AU for a long time now, Super and Super AU in Australian conferences, and also well up there in Super Rugby. This is a quality opponent if you're the Reds. So we can say that this is a very, very vastly improved performance from the Reds. Even say their victory over the Waratahs. This is a significant step up in terms of rugby, and they played an excellent game of rugby with more to come.
Morgs, I'm going to bring Simon in now because I know that he's sitting there patiently, and I also know that he watched the footy over the weekend because he was tweeting about it quite complimentary. So I'll just bring him in now. Simon Raiwalui, mate, how are you? Very good to see you. Coming from a Nadi, I believe you're in, aren't you, mate?
Yeah, pretty good. Well, thanks for having me on. It's quite cold tonight over here in Fiji, 24 degrees. A bit different there. So, no, it was some good rugby over the weekend. It was very enjoyable.
It was, mate. And look, we really appreciate you coming on. Simon, of course, part of the Wallabies coaching staff the last couple of years. Now the role is General Manager of Rugby in Fiji, correct? Yeah,
General Manager of the high performance. It was good to come back to where it all started for me in Fiji. So, yeah, it's obviously been an interesting transitional period coming in. Baptism of fire straight into COVID-19, no rugby. But it's been very enjoyable, and we've finally got back to playing some rugby domestically, and hopefully we have to travel soon.
Excellent. Well, mate, we brought you into the discussion around the Super Games in the weekend. We will talk about Fiji and the Pacific towards the end of the show. But for now, Morg, did you want to just mention who the player of the round was? And Simon, I'll get your thoughts on him as well.
Yeah, well, I think Benny. Actually, it was a casting vote in the end of Matt Tamua getting it because I thought that clump of players that we mentioned played quite well. But I just thought his impact on his team getting the win was so crucial. Steers that team around the park consistently. I've really seen him step up during this Super Rugby AU. Time in the seat in that 10 jersey, and Simon, you obviously had a bit to do with him. He's convincing me that he's as much a 10 as a 12 at the moment, which I never thought I would.
No, Matty's, like everyone said, he's a great 12, but he's got that game that can organise as well. And like you said before, he brings a physicality to that position. So that channel, which traditionally a lot of teams attack, he really has a lot of solidarity there. And I think he's really grown. I think with any team, with any 10, with time in that position, they grow. And I think Matt's really stepped up his game this year, and he's playing really well.
Morgs, did you want to have a quick look at that Reds try that we talked about? Now, I know we're just jumping around a little bit in terms of the games we're talking about, but I did want to put this one up before you go to your coach's corner because I thought it was a great example of what you talk about, particularly in terms of that wide, and this was one of those. How impressive were the Reds with some of their play, backing themselves from all over the field, Morgs?
Yeah, I think their play is continuing to evolve. I've said for a long time that the Reds have always seemed to be more comfortable without the ball than with it. And that's, that time together, it's just starting to evolve more and more and get better and better. The Brumbies, obviously, the first three steps off the line, the Brumbies are always quick. So they're looking to take away your space. as much as they can, they try and take that space away. And this is good. This is transfer straight into unstructured footy that we talk about, turnover, the old Harbour Bridge that I tell you what, the great Jim Mackay, he wouldn't like that. But then you just get it to one of your faster players on the field. And once they're in behind them, that look at the urgency to the support and secure that breakdown, and then just get that ball away from that point. And you've seen the Brumbies, they can't resist concertinaing back towards out of the ruck. And that's where the Reds have been really disciplined. The easy thing is to just chase the ball, chase the ruck. And then once they hold that width, oblige, as I say always, oblige the Brumbies to defend the full width of the field. That's where they get to have those one-on-ones with those creative players. And then once you're over the game line, I love seeing those players flatten up and challenge inside shoulders. And then the Brumbies are just stressed defensively. They cannot get a half a second to keep some time away from the ball. And then another short play back against the grain. So you'd see players hard at the line once you're over the advantage line while that defence is disorganised. Hard at the line at inside shoulders makes it very, very hard for a defensive system and individual tacklers to hold on.
Yeah, and one of my guys that was almost in my in the mix for me for players around, Dungunu. He's one of those guys I put in the same bucket as Korobeti, which is the effort is 100%. Both sides of the ball, as you said about Timur as well. Dungunu for me is doing that as well, working both sides of the ball. And Simon, how good to see a bloke like Jordan Patea back, who you would have seen come into our system, had a couple of injuries, but to come back, as I suppose Naisarani did, come back into the game, first game back, and have an impact.
Yeah, it was great to see Jordan back. And like Morgan said, every time he touched the ball, it was like a bolt of electricity, and you got Dungunu on the other side. Like the Reds have traditionally played through the middle very strongly with their offloading, their forward carrying, and that just tightens up the defences. And then when you've got those strike workers out of the width, it's pretty exciting brand of rugby, and I think they're getting that mix right this year.
Mate, another guy who was right in the mix there, even though that one might have been a high shot, Lukan Salakai-Loto. Mate, do you see him more as a six or a second rower?
Well, personally, I see him as a six. I believe Lukan's still a very young player, but I'm pretty biased. I think he's going to be one of the best players in the world for the next quite a few years. He's extremely talented. He's good at all the basics. He's tackling, his tight stuff, his line out, and he just brings a physicality to the game through the channel. He's one of those hybrid players that can play both, but I think his best position is at six, and he's a game changer.
Absolutely, mate. I've really appreciated it, and it's interesting the conversation because he's developed those handling skills. You can see his game's come along the last couple of years that he is bringing a little bit more. Morgs, did you want to go into your coach's corner moment from the game? Tell us why you pulled this one out, mate.
Well, just on Salakai-Loto, I think one thing that sticks in my head was the moment just before you saw him, that Bledisloe where he started at 6 and he was gassed after 30 minutes. I think we've always identified that if we could get his body right, if he could cope with the different demands of playing 6, he's the perfect profile for a number 6. So it's good to see him get more and more lengthy periods on the field playing that position at 6. And as the Reds play a bit more up-tempo, a lot more ball in play, that'll suit him having to take the next step as an international 6 as well. On that coach's corner, Benny, there was a couple of things to talk about. The interesting one is two parts of this play. It doesn't actually result in a try. So from this ruck, we've talked about the sort of arrowhead formation. So, Ben, if you freeze it here, if you go back straight, I'll just talk through it. Sorry, Benny. So obviously we talk about this formation with a forward with one on the inside, one on the outside as an option. And whether you're playing those 1-3-3-1 structures or 2-4-2, or the Japanese are playing 1-3-2-2, this setup is a really key part of multi-phase attacking shapes and structures at the moment. Obviously, as we've talked about, having that connected back at the back. Now here it's not the 10, it's Simone, and what we see is a really nice tip line, nice and short, and the ball goes out the back. So if you play it through, what often happens is it goes out the back because the outside backs have identified that there's space out wide. So we often see a 10 very deep out the back who shifts immediately. This is what I love to see, a player challenging the line, because what happens is when the tip line is run, it makes that defender opposite the tip runner jam in on him, and so that opens up a weak shoulder on the outside. You see here, I think it's Brendan Pangaromosa, has to jam in really late on Simone. And what's good is you see Valentini, who are deep, looking for that wide one. Valentini and Scotty Seo react and try and flatten up. I love seeing backs challenge that space. And as they go through, they flatten up and they're just in behind the Reds here. And the Reds do well to hang on. And he gets the way to Valentini. They get, way over the gain line. line break, fast ball. O'Connor comes in and makes a tackle, and you'll see there at the top of the screen, the Reds 15's in the line. So this is an excellent option. So there's no one in the backfield for the Reds in defence. O'Connor had to make the tackle because they went through the line, and the 15 for the Reds is in the line. Bailey Kunzel kicks. We're not sure whether he looks up and sees it himself, or he got good comms on the outside. It almost doesn't matter that the ball goes into touch. The option there was excellent. Identification of opportunity and space. The other thing is, look, you can flatten up and maybe shift that ball and see if you can go around them and pass it. But once again, Benny, we're talking cause and effect as well. I think Rod Cather mentioned in the commentary, if you're a Reds winger, next time you're even more on your heels than previously. And G does well there on the left wing to snuff that out, because Carter was probably away if you could get through there with a clean run. Excellent footy from the Brumbies. And you see there it was Simone who took that ball through and challenged the line. I'd love to see more of our young 10s do it. What we often see is centres, when they're at the back of it, are more likely, because they're running plays. And Tamua's done really well because, once again, has spent time as a centre, challenge the line, go through the line. So some new faces who are putting their hand up in the development of the Brumbies attacking plays, which we talked to Peter Hewitt about last week, and probably both of them putting themselves up into conversations about higher honours much further down the track. We're talking, of course, Benny.
Well, the thing that I like about this play that you've pulled out as well, too, is one thing you always talk. We've got a T-shirt for it too, the Bodies in Motion T-shirt. But you always talk about bodies in motion, and it's exactly that with this three-man arrow formation and Simone just coming around the back. It keeps that back line, that defensive line, in a couple of different minds. And the other thing that you highlighted in here that I really like too was it was a couple of these players who are on the rise. Simone's the one who takes advantage of that weak shoulder, but then it's Kunzel who is only having his third start, in leading this team around, who spots that O'Connor's made the tackle, sees the gap in behind, and puts a good kick in. What did you think of that play, Simon? It's certainly well structured by the Brumbies.
No, like Morgan said, when you're playing that sort of shape, the most important thing is those guys in motion, especially that tip guy. You see, I think it was Nick Frost there. He came through with running that hard line, and he was a definite option. So if that defender, he has to make a decision whether he stays on Nick Frost or he bumps off to Simone. So that one there, he obviously went on to Nick Frost, and it opened up the gap for Simone. So too often, it's quite frustrating as a coach. Those guys that are in those lines, when they know they're pulling back to the back, they don't have their hands up. They're not running the line, so you actually know what's happening as a defence, so you can push through. But Nick Frost really good, hands up, running a hard line, had to make that defender make a decision.
Well, look, that's a lovely segue. It's like you've been on the show regularly, Simon. That's a lovely segue into our next segment, which we wanted to talk to you about, which is the second rowers. Now, of course, I said at the top of the show, the big news this week is that the most experienced second rower currently running around in the Super AU, Rob Simmons, has signed with the London Irish. He's off. Follows a whole heap of blokes overseas, like Adam Coleman, Rory Arnold, whom I'm missing from the Queensland, Rodder from the Reds. There's been a bunch of blokes. Our second row stocks have started to become a bit leaner. I just want to have a look at who's here and get some thoughts from you, Simon, on the guys that we should be keeping an eye on. I look at this list here. Ned Hannigan, for me, is a makeshift second rower, not really a second rower that to me, at super level, I think he's done okay, but not particularly at test level. Got a couple of young blokes there at the Brumbies, another fella there at the Force we haven't seen too much of, another couple of young guys at the Rebels, and again, we've got Lucan there at the Reds with Angus. What do you think of the second row stocks at the moment, Simon? Is it an area of concern?
No, obviously, losing that sort of talent overseas is never ideal. And you can add guys like Harry Hocking, Matt Phillip as well. I think he's going to pose. So
yep.
I think Matt was probably the next one off the rank that was probably going to get. He was right in line to play for the Wallabies. Very good second row. But it shows some of the talent that we've got in Australia at the moment. To be able to have those young guys coming in like Trevor there, your Darcy Swains, your Nick. I don't know much about Nick Frost, but he's really shone out the last 2 weeks. He's very athletic, good ball carrier, physical, and you got Angus Blythe up in Queensland. So you've got it's a pretty deep pool, even though those guys have gone overseas. But I think in terms of the guys that have really stood out for me, I think Darcy Swain's been pretty good. He's been pretty consistent over the last 2 years. He's well coached down in the Brumbies, does all the basics really well. I think a guy like Trevo Sang brings a bit of an X factor in the second row as well with his ball carrying and his physicality. So brings a good mix. But then you've got guys like Angus Blythe as well, very good. we've got a lot of talent there, considering how many people have left.
With sorry, but I'm going to butt in with the fact, you know, we'll probably have a Wallaby test, say the 6th or 7th of November. So that's how far away it is. Who in that group do you think is up to that test level standard? If you've got to play South Africa and New Zealand in a rugby championship first game, or the All Blacks, who do you think could be up? That's a demanding ask straight away. First test straight into it. Who's up to that, do you think, at the moment?
Yeah, well, I've always been a big fan of Darcy Swain. I think he's a good guy. If you wanted to play, Lucan's obviously got that experience as well. Yeah. So the other guys are very untested. So it's obviously going to be a learning curve for them. But just in terms of what they've been putting out in Super Rugby and the level that they've been playing at, I think any of those 5 guys are going to be able to step up. And I think they're going to be chomping at the bit as well, because they've obviously seen there's an opportunity there for them to get into the test team, and depending on how long some of those guys are overseas, cement their spot and maybe not give it back.
I think, Simon, one of the things clearly is going to be that if Dave Rennie's putting a team together, how many young blokes versus, you know, more experienced guys, how much youth he can carry in a team, you know, how much pain you can take bringing these young blokes along. What do you want to see happen? And I put that in the context of the Wallabies team, the management that you were a part of, some of the criticism that there was perhaps too much change in the lineup. Do you take that criticism? Do you think that was something that did happen with the Wallabies lineup a bit? And how do you manage that with young blokes?
Yeah, obviously, as little change as possible if you can. It builds those relationships. But I think Mork's touched on it before. This is an unusual time this year. It's going to be a lot of people leaving. There's transitions, different competitions. So there may be a reliance on those younger guys coming through, and they're going to have to step up. And I think what the Super Rugby AU has shown that rugby's, like, for all the criticism that there's been about rugby in Australia at the moment, it's in a pretty good position talent-wise. I think we're in a position where we can dictate our future, not have it dictated to us, and I think that's very important.
Interesting, mate. Let's talk about where you are now. And before I do, I'll just take a lesson from one of the viewers on my pronunciation. Thank you, Danielle. I've completely stuffed that one.
I was going to say that too. Yeah, Simon's too polite.
Simon's too polite to hit me on that one, but thanks for that, Simon. Mate, look, tell us what's happening in Fiji and rugby at the moment. There's been a lot of news. There's been some change in the political setup, the leadership of Fiji rugby. Been in the news a lot. There's some the 8-team comp in the year. What's the focus and what's happening in Fiji and rugby at the moment?
Yeah, well, obviously the focus was, like all the other countries, you skip at playing rugby. Obviously we had a big period off, and our boys hadn't played for probably 4 and 5 months. And to be fair, like, Fiji's not got the same resources that other countries have, so we didn't have the luxury of giving the boys a rower, a bike, and weights and stuff like that. So we had to be very inventive and think outside the box, and do a lot of training through Facebook, giving them programs, using different sorts of things for training that you probably wouldn't use in Australia or New Zealand, but very adaptable, the Fijians. But like, yeah, what? Obviously, anything. We using the field, using clothes instead of bands. It just been inventive. If you haven't got a ball, getting a coconut, using that for your skills. Just been adaptable. The boys they were really good, very responsive, and looked after themselves very well during that period, and came back, to be fair, and better Nick than we thought they were going to be.
Excellent, mate. Now, there's a couple of things in the news lately. One of which has been the way that the support of World Rugby happens. I've seen you on Twitter. You've been quite vocal on Twitter around. There's probably a couple of different views around the way that the World Rugby money is handled or hits the Pacific Islands. What's your view on the current structure of the way that Fiji fits in and the way that it should or is supported?
Yeah, I think if you're going to talk about funding and you're going to talk about World Rugby, what they do, you have to educate yourself and learn what actual funding is, because there's a lot of talk about what it's been spent on and how players haven't been paid with that funding, which is not what funding's for. Funding's for the development and for the growth of the game in the Pacific. So in terms of, like, I'm responsible for the funding within Fiji, and it's basically a 5-step process before you can actually access the funds. It has to be signed off by myself, then go to a World Rugby representative, come back to myself, then go to an account, separate account, and then go back to World Rugby before that money is accessed. So some of the commentary can be damaging because they have a big voice and people listen to that. So I'd prefer that if you're going to talk about something, be educated about it, and that because so a lot of talk can be damaging within what we're trying to do within the Pacific.
So, mate, what needs to happen now for the Pacific? Morgs and I have talked about COVID as an opportunity, right? And you can see it in Australian rugby. Australian rugby right now has the chance to rip the rule book up a little bit and say, right, well, what needs to happen? Some of the excitement, for us in the last year or two, particularly ahead of the elections for World Rugby, was that there might have been global changes, different recognition, and some of the things that stand out as being, particularly wrong about games when you see Pacific Island nations travelling to play in England and not getting the kind of funding that they should when they draw big crowds to games. What are the things that should be considered to make the most of bringing the Pacific Island nations along the rugby path better? They're such a rich part of our game. What could or should we be doing?
I think a lot of it's about opportunities. I think we'll probably touch on it later. What we need within the Pacific is a team playing in the Pacific so our players can come home and play consistent rugby together against the highest level. As you can probably see, most of our talent is worldwide. So we've got nearly probably 60% of our talent playing in Europe, either in the US or in Australia or New Zealand at a lower level. What we need is to be able to bring that talent back, consistent training against opposition and then playing against high opposition. And if we get that, the world's our oyster because we've got what most people are after, the talent.
And in that regard, mate, it takes us straight into New Zealand talking about having a Pacific Islands team based in New Zealand. Australia came out and said, well, hang on, what about Western Sydney? How does that sort of discussion land in the Pacific Islands?
Oh, it's interesting that New Zealand and Australia are discussing a Pacific Island team. Obviously, they're both islands in the Pacific, so they got the right to talk about it. But when you're talking about the Pacific, you're traditionally talking about Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga. And if you're going to discuss that Pacific team, you have to include those teams in the discussion, especially if you're going to access their talent and want them to fill the team. So we make hide nothing about wanting to have a team and be able to host a team, but also important for us is even if we didn't have a team, our players being able to play within those competitions. Because you look within the two Super Rugby competitions, there's one Fijian international, and that's Frank Lamani down in Melbourne, and he comes on and plays on the wing. So we talk about the things that are hard for us and what makes it difficult. Firstly, not having our talent being able to play locally in the best competitions is one of those. And then to be able to bring the squad from all the way from here to assemble for any game, that's very, very difficult. So there's a number of things that need to go forward. But like you said, it's a very exciting time. I think there's a lot of opportunities that we could be created from there.
Yeah. So, mate, do you think it's critical that the Pacific team is based in the Pacific and not in Australia or New Zealand? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, that's my personal opinion. Right. I think.
And then quickly, does that mean pick a country because the three, the PIRA or whatever it is, the Pacific combined team doesn't really work too hard? Do we have to really pick one nation to begin with a view to maybe?
I think it's a tough thing to bring the three nations together. I think personally, from a Fijian point of view, we've got enough talent to, if we bring it back, it's a very, by year 2, year 3, it's a very, very competitive team if they're staying together. Obviously, my interest as well is developing not only Fiji, but the Pacific, Samoa and Tonga. So including them in some capacity would obviously be a benefit to us because the stronger the Pacific is, the stronger Fiji is.
So, mate, there's opportunity there. Are Fiji currently into conversations with Australia and New Zealand? Can you talk to that at all? Like, I mean, if right now these conversations are going on in Australia and New Zealand, and to be frank, it doesn't look like they've been talking enough, to be honest. We saw New Zealand come out with their plan and invite Australia in. Is the conversation being had enough, mate? Do you need to get more involved?
I think there's conversations going on, but it's more at a higher level at the moment. Obviously, there's a number of factors as well. It's not just talent. It's about having infrastructure, commercial funding as well. So there are a number of factors that are going to be looked into it. But there's definitely been discussions at a higher level, but nothing too formal.
Great. Well, Morgs, look, that's going to wrap us up, and we really appreciate Simon coming in. Any final thoughts, Morgs, before we let Simon go?
Yeah, I suppose one thing I will say about Fiji, that would be my preference. It would be if you go Trans-Tasman, my ideal would be Trans-Tasman with Fiji, and if we could swing it, maybe Kobe, Suntory, and Panasonic, and that would be perfect for me. If I could get a competition tomorrow, that's what I'd do. We can discuss how many Australian teams we could have, probably another time, Benny. But and the other thing is obviously we didn't talk too much about Simon's time in the Wallabies, but for those people that look back on the World Cup, obviously our results weren't great. But if you look at the sectors that Simon looked after within the Wallabies program, they're the ones that performed exceptionally well. So it was a big loss to Australian rugby in the coaching ranks, and a great pickup for Fiji, which he's obviously passionate about. So we wish him all the best, and hopefully we'll see a lot of him involved, hopefully in a Super Rugby competition.
Simon, we'll just take a question from the crowd. Jason Sherman said, what about the NRC and the Drua? Has that been a positive impact? Is that something that's been beneficial and something to build on?
I think it was huge. It was huge I think it was a benefit to Australian rugby as well. It really gave a profile to that NRC competition. For us, we had 2 semi-finals and a win, and in 3 years it produced, I think it was 18 internationals, flying Fijians. Wow. So for a 3-year period, it's absolutely astounding. It's a great number, and it's obviously a competition that we'd love to go ahead, but obviously it's difficult in these situations to predict anything. We don't know anything beyond 2020, and but that's a level of rugby that has obviously benefited us. And you see what a local team playing against the external competition does. It gives that exposure, and then take that to a next level with Super Rugby. You can it would even be better for Fiji.
Excellent. Well, look, Simon, we really do appreciate your time, mate. We hope that you and your family are safe during this period, and that we see some good stuff and your boys can start to play some footy soon. That'd be awesome. Thank you very much for your time, mate. That's the Rugby Ruckus for this week, guys. That was the Type 5. Thank you, Morgs. We'll see you all next week.
Cheers.